Hi, my name is Josh Faigen. I'm an XPP style developer, trainer, and consultant. And today, I'm going to guide you through a new process that's part of XPP version 9.8. If you're watching this video, you're probably a user, style developer, system administrator, or manager in a publishing environment anchored by RWS's XML Professional Publisher System, XPP. So whatever your position or responsibilities or work environment, welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about XPP and fonts, specifically OT or OpenType fonts, and even more specifically about integrating alternate glyph substitution rules called features that are built into the OTF fonts themselves and include certain specialty characters. You may find yourself facing requirements to use these special characters, called glyphs, in your workflow. It used to be a daunting and complex task to build coding structures known as cmaps that would allow XPP to access these glyphs. Then, to install custom cmaps so that they could be used successfully by XPP composition posed another hurdle. Even finding where, in which feature of which font you might be able to locate the elusive character you're after can get a little crazy. So if this sounds complicated, well, it doesn't have to be. I'm going to try to uncomplicate this little corner of the font universe and show you a new set of XPP processes allowing you to simplify and automate OTF font installation and access all the characters you may need. Stick with me, and by the time we're finished, you'll know how to find, install, and use the characters you want, anxiety-free, a glyph hunt, if you will. We'll start by looking at some of the basics of XPP font organization. XPP catalogs, organizes, and provides users with powerful and flexible management of fonts. It won't be possible in this video to provide a comprehensive or in-depth review of the entire XPP font system, but I will cover some basic concepts before we actually tackle the new glyph features of 9.8. To begin, remember that fonts in XPP are cataloged using what are called FASTs, or font access tables. Each individual font has a unique FAST number, and in general, the numbering systems are assigned by you, the user. Since we'll be dealing with the delivered suite of Noto fonts, let's take a look at the standard Noto font variant, or FV Spec. The font variant occupies the highest level of the XPP font system structure and contains a list of fonts that will be usable in any particular job or division. So you may have custom font variant specs for different jobs, depending on the font requirements of the divisions in that job. We can take a more detailed look at the font variant spec shortly. As I mentioned in this video, we'll work with the suite of Noto fonts designed by Google. You can find a description of Noto fonts on the Google Fonts webpage. Noto is a collection of fonts with multiple weights and widths in sans, serif, mono, and other styles. Here's a couple of interesting facts. Noto means I write, or I mark, or I note in Latin. Also, the name is short for no tofu. Tofu are the blank rectangles I'm sure we've all seen when no font is available for text in your XPP divisions. I have to admit that in my long experience as a typographer, I had not heard that term before. Anyway, before XPP 9.7, generally the basic or default delivered font sets were Times and Helvetica. Since 9.7, XPP has replaced them as defaults with the Noto font set. Of course, you can still install and use Times and Helvetica in really pretty much any font family. But for a lot of you, Noto fonts will be perfectly acceptable for most of your customers' requirements. Noto are OpenType or OT fonts. Developed by Adobe and Microsoft, the OpenType format allows for, among other things, a much larger character set than the older Type 1 fonts you may have used in the past and can still use in XPP. Also, OT fonts support what Adobe calls expanded character set features, which will be important as we look at how the folks at XPP have added processes to access these extra characters. I should also mention that all the characters in OpenType and therefore in Noto fonts are identified by Unicode values. And of course, XPP has used these values internally for a very long time, but I'm sure you already know that. Let's return briefly to talk about OpenType features, since this will become important when we discuss XPP's new process to access alternate glyphs. Adobe provides the best description, I think, of what these features are. Again, you can find this information on the adobe.com website. Let me read the two-paragraph description. Quote, central to a discussion of OpenType feature support lies the distinction between characters and glyphs. Characters are the code points assigned by the Unicode standard, which represent the smallest semantic units of language, such as letters. Glyphs are the specific forms that those characters can take. One character may correspond to several glyphs. The lowercase a small cap a, and an alternate swash lowercase a are all the same character, but they are three separate glyphs. One glyph can also represent multiple characters, such as in the case of the FFI ligature, which corresponds to a sequence of three characters, F, F, and I. OpenType layout features can be used to position or substitute glyphs. For any character, there's a default glyph and positioning behavior. The application of layout features to one or more characters may change the positioning or substitute a different glyph. For example, the application of the small capitals feature to the A would substitute the small cap A glyph for the usual lowercase a glyph. To access alternate glyphs in an OpenType font, an application provides a user interface that allows end users to apply OpenType layout features to text. The important thing is that XPP has now built a process to access these alternate substitute glyphs. But remember, this only includes the OTF features that address single character substitution. Features that substitute multiple characters for a single character, or vice versa, are not supported in XPP, although, of course, XPP does offer other methods for multiple character substitution, like ligatures and accented characters. To understand XPP's new process to access alternate glyphs, we should review some of the basics of fonts. Fonts in XPP are cataloged using what are called FASTs, or font access tables. Each individual font has a unique FAST number, and in general, the numbering conventions are assigned by XPP users. Since we're talking about Noto fonts, let's take a deeper look at the standard Noto Font Variant Spec, which is now delivered with an XPP installer upgrade. Of course, you can add other fonts to the Noto Font Variant Spec or copy parts of it to your own custom font variants. But for now, let's focus on some of the FV fields to review how XPP keeps track of fonts. First, each rule in the font variant contains information about a particular font. As I said, central to the XPP font system are FASTs. Each font is associated with one or more FAST numbers. For example, in the first rule, the font is Noto Serif Regular. Look at the second column of fields and we find three FAST numbers, primary, secondary, and default. For the Noto fonts, the primary FAST links all of the information about the basic characters contained in the font. In XPP, that would include data from other specs such as fast generation, photo typesetter, kerning pairs, and typesetter font maps. The function of these specs is beyond the scope of this video, but you can always find out more about them in the XPP documentation called, appropriately enough, Fonts. I've provided a link to XPP documentation below. The secondary FAST number gathers all the character information for symbols included in the Noto Sans Symbols font. Weirdly, symbols in these fonts can be used with any Noto character fonts, sans serif or serif or whatever. This confused me when I first learned about it, since I would have thought that the word sans in the name of the symbol fonts meant that they should contain specific symbols for sans serif characters, and that there would be a separate set of symbols for the serif fonts. But no, the symbols are all labeled as sans. So thanks, Google. An important note. Don't confuse symbols with glyphs. Each symbol has its own unique Unicode. Glyphs, on the other hand, normally substitute certain alternate characters but are also called by using the same Unicode or keystroke. You can see that there are 9 Noto symbol fonts organized by weight. So you'd think that there would be 9 different FASTs in XPP that can be used as Noto secondary FASTs, and you would be right. For Noto Serif Regular, the secondary FAST number is 10001. Same for Noto Serif Italic, which makes sense. There isn't really any such thing as an italic symbol that's different from a Roman one. The third associated fast number refers to CJK characters. CJK stands for Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, and those character sets include Chinese, Hangul, and Kana characters. If you work with those languages, you're all set. The other fields I want to point out are the font family and font variant numbers. Unlike human families, each font family in XPP has the same first name, with the variant making up the last name. For example, the family number 0 is used with each variation of the Noto serif font. There are actually 17 of them, varying in weight and style all the way from extra light and extra light italic to black and black italic. It will be important to keep track of all these numbers. When you add fonts in XPP, the numbering setup is by and large up to you. XPP will happily overwrite fast, family, and variant numbers, although with a warning, so be careful. To that end, I've always set up a spreadsheet to help me assign usable and correct numbering when I add fonts. This is one I built for the Noto serif family. Whether you use this method or some other, I highly recommend you adhere to a logical and strict font numbering convention and keep a careful record of it. I'm sure you know that font family and variant numbers are used when we set up XPP composition styles, for example, in the item format and macro specs. And of course, FF and FV numbers can also be embedded in divisions using macros or processing instructions. But it's important to remember that with the advent of XPP CSS mode, we instead substitute font names and named styles for the font family and variant numbers. Which you use depends on your workflow. I want to mention that RWS offers an excellent e-learning course on styling content using the XPP CSS tool. It's really good and a great way to go. If you're interested, you should definitely contact RWS for more information. We've pretty much accounted for most of the Noto characters in all the Noto fonts. What's left to do? Well, we still have to deal with the alternate glyph features that are also included with the fonts. You know, the character substitution business I mentioned earlier. Let's review. OpenType fonts contain glyph substitution features, little bits of coding that allow composition to access glyphs not otherwise available as separate characters with unique Unicodes. However, it is important to remember that the creators of the OpenType standard, while providing for features, do not restrict font developers to any particular glyphs. It's a bit of the Wild West out there when it comes to determining fonts that contain a specific glyph you may need, and then figuring out where or in which alternate glyph feature that glyph may live. XPP does not provide any specific lookup tools to help you in your search. However, there are several reference tools and guides that can assist you in your wanderings. One of the best is a website called Wakamaifondue. Check below for the URL. We can take a short tour of Wakamaifondue, and no, I don't know where they came up with the name. It's easy to start by simply going to the home page and drag and drop the OTF font you want to check. We'll use Noto Serif Regular. Scroll down to find out, first, general information about the font. At the bottom of the screen is a list of all the available features. Some are required, and those are listed first. And then comes the optional features section. You can click the Show checkbox to toggle views of the original characters in the font and the alternate substitute glyphs that activating that particular feature will provide. For example, let's take a look at the ONUM feature, which contains old-style figures. Clicking the Show checkbox alternates views of standard numeral characters 0 through 9. Click it again, and you can see that this feature will automatically substitute old-style numerals, again 0 through 9. Some of the features contain entire substituted alphabets, for example the small cap or SMCP feature. Others contain only a few substitutions. The MGRK, or Mathematical Greek feature, has only 2 characters, the omega and the mu. Oddly, I can't see any difference between the base characters and the alternate glyphs, but I'm sure there must be something unique to them. Remember that multiple glyph substitutions, such as standard ligatures and kerning, even though they are automatically turned on in the font itself, are ignored by XPP, which has other ways to do those things. It's important to emphasize that you will have to figure out which feature of which font you will need in order to access the alternate glyph you're looking for before beginning the process of adding alternate glyphs to your XPP environment. If you want more information about OpenType fonts and you're willing to wade through a font editing program, I highly recommend FontForge. It's open source and is available for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. It's not the most intuitive program in the font editing world, but it is remarkably complete and, of course, free. Find a link to the FontForge site below. There is one last topic we need to address before diving into the new alternate glyph process itself, and that's how XPP organizes and stores the actual OTF fonts. So let's take a look at the folders and files in the operating system that contain and control XPP fonts. A note, I'm working here with Windows version of XPP, but most of the following also applies to the Linux version. Just think of directories instead of folders. In either case, you should be able to navigate through the same file organization. First, on your XPP server, find the folder that contains your XPP system. On my server, that would be the folder named XPP. Kind of obvious, and generally that'll be the location on your server as well, but not always. Within the XPP folder, there are 3 required subfolders. SD_Liz contains the XPP style libraries. STD_jobs, with a Z, contains the data. You know, classes, groups, jobs, and divisions. What we're interested in here is the XZ folder that we commonly refer to as Ziz. The Ziz folder contains everything software, that is, everything that makes XPP work. Now, open the Ziz folder and navigate to the psres folder. This is where your installed fonts live, along with other control files. Let's investigate. We see that there is a fonts folder and psres files. We'll start with the fonts themselves by opening the fonts folder. This should be pretty obvious. In the fonts folder are a collection of subfolders with the extension .font. The name of each folder is the name of which font it contains. Since we'll be working with the Noto serif regular font, let's open that one way down at the bottom. Once an OpenType font has been installed in XPP, this is what you'll see. First is the font itself, in this case Noto serif regular.otf. Even though the Noto fonts are delivered with XPP, it's important to remember that all actual OTF font files, Noto or otherwise, come from font vendors, where it be Adobe, Google, Monotype, or whoever. In order to use any OTF font, it's your responsibility to purchase the OTF files before you install them in XPP. The Noto suite is open source, so that's how XPP can include them in an install. There are 2 other files in the Noto serif regular.otf folder, a .afm and a .cmap. AFM stands for Adobe Font Metrics. This is leftover terminology from the old Type 1 days. Font metrics refers to information XPP needs to set up widths and kerning data. I'll open this AFM file so you can get an idea of what's going on. The beginning of the AFM file includes comments about the font itself, including its name, the version of the font file, and trademark and copyright information. After all of that are character-by-character entries. C is the character number, and WX indicates the width in relative units, or thousandths of an M. Then comes the name of the character and bounding box information. For those of you who are hopeless font wonks, the 4 digits refer to the X and Y coordinates of the upper left and lower right corners of the box enclosing the character shape. Phew. The last thing is the Unicode or hex number for that character. Farther down are kerning metrics. The cmap file maps characters in the font to particular character numbers, which in this case match the character's Unicode number. Again, this is just to shed a little light on what the cmap file is doing. Of course, if you think about it, when we build alternate glyph files from the OTF feature set, you can imagine that there will be changes to both the AFM and the CMAP files. Later, when we add different collections of glyphs to our base font, we will compare the cmaps to easily see which glyphs have been added. When you use the XPP font copy tool, both the CMAP and the AFM files are extracted from information already in the OTF font file. You don't have to mess with them in any sort of custom operation. In fact, I'd recommend it against doing anything to these files. They can be touchy. By the way, font copy also creates the font folders within psres/fonts automatically, so you don't have to worry about that either. Let's back up a bit. In the psres folder, there are files also named psres. The only one we're interested in is psres.upr. I'll open it up so we can take a peek. XPP will look inside this file to determine how each individual font part in psres is connected to each part of the XPP font system. This would include connecting cmaps, AFMs, and font outlines, allowing XPP to fetch the correct font when called for in a division. By the way, the font outlines are really the proprietary design part of the font. It's mostly what you're paying for when you purchase a font. A word to the wise. Please do not manually change anything in this file. It'll be automatically updated by font copy when you install a new font, and errors caused by users editing psres.upr can cause a world of pain. Now, finally, we're ready to go through the process of adding glyphs to fonts. Remember, again, that this process is delivered with XPP 9.8. If you have an earlier version, well, it's not going to work, which is a great reason to upgrade. Okay, we're ready to roll. The alternate glyph process involves two steps. We've already talked about font copy. In 9.8, there are changes to font copy process that will allow you to install alternate glyphs from a number of the character substitution features in OpenType we discussed. After running font copy, we'll run another tool called BuildFast. This is the process that creates all the necessary XPP spec entries in all the XPP specs that make up the font system. You may already be familiar with these specs, such as the Photo Typesetter, or PTS, the Fast Generation, or FGS, Typesetter Font Maps, or TSF, the X-Library Fast Specs, or VFX, and so on. If you want to learn more about the XPP font system as a whole, I recommend you take a look at the XPP documentation titled Fonts. I mentioned this reference earlier, and you can check down below in the information to find details. So, let's go through the process step by step. Again, we'll be working with the Noto Serif regular font, but the same process should be perfectly usable on any OTF font. First, as we covered earlier in this video, locate the glyphs you need by referencing Wakamaifondue or FontForge or whatever other resource you're comfortable with. Next, create a reference file of some sort that will guide you in choosing the proper fast, font family, and font variant numbers. Here's the spreadsheet that I showed earlier. It only takes a few minutes to create, and it will save you a lot of misery later on. Now, we need to have a copy of the OTF font file that contains the substitute glyphs we're looking for. In this case, we'll use Noto Serif Regular. Remember, the OTF file lives in its own font folder in psres/fonts. Font copy won't work if the font file is still in psres, and anyway, it wouldn't be a good idea to run it on your only copy of the font. So I recommend making another copy and putting it somewhere you can access. You might want to make a completely separate Noto font folder or directory, or maybe just put a copy in a temp folder. In our case, I'll copy it to a subfolder in my user folder. Let's say we have a requirement for text that substitutes small caps for regular text and old-style numerals for regular numerals in Noto Serif Regular. Checking Wakamaifondue, we can see that there is an OpenType feature called ONUM, which will give us old-style numerals, and another called SMCP, which will provide the small caps. We'll use those. Our next move is to access the Font Copy tool from XPP Pathfinder. That can be found under Tools in the menu bar. Font Copy will open a Select Font File window. We'll choose Noto Regular.otf, the copied font that we put in our separate Noto Fonts folder. After choosing and clicking on Open, the question, "Do you want to access any alternative forms in any of the OpenType fonts?" appears. And of course we do. So click Yes. If you've used Font Copy before in older versions of XPP, you can see that this is one of the new additions to version 9.8. Also new is the next box, which contains the instruction, "Select which alternate forms you want to access for font Noto Serif Regular." There's a clickable list containing every OTF feature that XPP now supports, in alphabetical order. For example, we'll check the boxes labeled SMCP and ONUM. You can choose as many alternate glyph features as you need. You're not restricted in that respect. If you're adding alternate glyph features to a font you have already installed, you'll get a message asking if you want to overwrite the existing font with the new one. You should say yes. This will force XPP to replace the old font with one that now will include the alternate glyphs. Once you click OK, you get a couple of progress windows telling you that Font Copy is creating the appropriate new CMap and AFM files, and a few other messages. Then we're presented with the next question, update the font search path. Unless you have some very unusual requirements, you should always say yes here. XPP will then update the psres.upr file we looked at earlier to include the new Noto Serif Regular small caps and old-style numeral fonts. You get a polite little "Please wait" window, then another box that confirms that all of the font copy processes necessary to create our alternate glyph font is complete. Let's head back to the XPP psres folder and see what's happened. Scrolling down, there are two new font folders called Noto Serif Regular, but unlike the base font, these folder names have the additional underbar ONUM and underbar SMCP added to their names. And inside those folders, Font Copy has created new AFM and cmap files containing, we assume, old-style numeral and small-cap alternate glyphs. Here, you might immediately notice that neither of these folders contain a copy of the actual OTF font. There's no need for XPP to make more copies of that font, as the original OTF already contains all the alternate glyph features. So even when using the old-style numeral or small caps features, the software will automatically reference the Noto Regular OTF file that lives in the base folder. A quick CMap compare run in Notepad++ shows pretty much what we expected. For the old-style numerals, for example, all of the regular numerals are replaced. You can see the replacement character names all have .tosf name extensions. Seems to have worked. Now, we can move on to the next part of the process, running build fast. Before we do that, I want to refer to the fast numbering list that I showed you earlier just to make sure I have the correct numbers at hand once we run the tool. I've decided, somewhat arbitrarily, to number the regular ONUM fast 545 and the font variant number 45. The small caps will be fast 546 and the font variant 46. The font family number remains the same, 0, since we're still working in the Noto Serif family. The secondary and default fasts will also match the regular base font. Remember, you can set up fast and family and variant numbering however you want. It's just important that you set up a numbering convention and keep track, so you don't accidentally duplicate and overwrite a fast. That can be a big headache. Okay, we're ready. Let's start with the old-style numerals feature. Back in Pathfinder, under Tools again, open Build Fast. Navigate to our new Noto Serif Regular onum.font folder, open it, and open the AFM file. This brings up the Build Fast window. Many of the fields are exactly the same as the old Build Fast before version 9.8. Notice there's a new field near the top titled Alternate Forms. It's already automatically filled in with the correct feature, ONUM. Also, in the CSX section of the window, there's a new field called CSS Font Feature Settings, which is also set to ONUM. If your XPP workflow involves the CSS tool, you'll now be able to use the Font Feature Settings property to indicate that you want the old style numerals or whatever other feature you need to access to be active. Finally, let's fill in the remaining fields. A new rule will be added to the Noto Font Variant spec that lives in the XPP Noto Font Width library. You can put any font variant spec name here depending on your production needs. Our primary fast number should be 545, our secondary fast number should be 10001, and the font variant number should be 45. The font family number is 0. When you click Apply, the process runs and returns an information box telling you what the tool has completed. Again, if you want more information about any of the specs that BuildFast creates, please refer to the XPP Fonts doc. We'll run BuildFast again to install the small caps feature. There are a couple of easy ways to test if our alternate glyph process worked. Let's go to a sample job that's delivered with XPP 9.8. First, note that this job, called Images, has a local font variant spec, and of course, this FB spec won't have our new old-style numerals and small cap font rules. Remember, in BuildFast, we added the new rules to the library font variant, but it's a simple matter to save those rules and then restore them to the local spec in the Images job. I'll do that now. Next, I'll open the README division. About halfway down the page, the number 12 appears. Opening Line Editor at that point will change the font variant to 45, which should change the regular numerals to old-style ones. We compose, and it works. Let's run another test, this time using a division composed in CSS mode. Although it'll be kind of ugly, we'll change all the text to small caps. In the CSS spec, and to test our alternate glyphs, I'll uncomment a statement containing the property font feature settings with a value of smcp to the root element doc. I'll save the spec and recompose the division. Clearly, the test is a success. And voila. Thanks for joining me on this XPP adventure through the land of alternate glyphs. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to joining you again.